The morning sun reflected off the glass walls of Ethan Mercer's luxury penthouse in Riverside, Connecticut. At 30 years old, Ethan had everything money could buy: designer furniture, expensive art on the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. But something was missing. Every morning followed the same routine. Wake up alone in his king-sized bed. Shower in the marble bathroom. Put on an expensive suit. Drive his Tesla to the same artisan coffee shop on Main Street. Order the same black coffee. Then head to Mercer Designs, the architectural firm his late father had built from nothing. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," his assistant said, handing him messages and his schedule for the day. Ethan nodded, barely looking up as he walked to his corner office. As CEO of Mercer Designs, Ethan had achieved everything his father wanted for him. The company was more successful than ever. Yet as he looked around at the cold glass and steel of his office, he felt empty. His relationships were shallow, his friendships based on business connections. In many ways, his life resembled the buildings he designed, impressive from the outside, but lacking warmth within. Across town in Westside, the alarm clock rang at 4:30 a.m. in a small one-bedroom apartment. Zoe Washington, a 20-year-old black woman with determined eyes, carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake her mother. The apartment was tiny but clean, with water stains on the ceiling and the faint smell of dampness that never quite went away. In the cramped kitchen, Zoe made a simple coffee and prepared her mom's medications for the day. Diane Washington, once a hardworking nursing assistant, had been forced to cut back her hours when her heart condition worsened. Now Zoe carried the burden of supporting them both. "You're up early again," Diane said, appearing in the doorway in her worn bathrobe. "I picked up an extra cleaning shift at the Mercer building," Zoe explained, arranging pills in a daily organizer. "You should be resting." "I'm not dead yet," Diane said with a weak smile. "You work too hard." "What about your classes?" "Evening classes are going fine. Professor Ramirez says I have a real talent with kids." Zoe's eyes lit up briefly, revealing her passion for early childhood education. Despite working 3 cleaning jobs, she still managed to attend community college classes 4 nights a week. "You'll make an amazing teacher someday," Diane said, pride evident in her voice despite the worry lines etched on her face. Before leaving, Zoe checked their calendar marked with doctor's appointments and bill due dates. The stack of medical bills grew larger each month, their insurance covering less and less of Diane's specialized care. By 6 a.m., Zoe was already mopping floors at her first job. Her hands were rough from cleaning chemicals, but she worked with quiet efficiency. By afternoon, she'd arrive at the Mercer Designs building for her second shift. Sometimes, she caught glimpses of Ethan Mercer through the glass walls of the executive floor, a world as inaccessible to her as the moon. Later that day, Zoe sat alone in a hospital waiting room, clutching a medical report. The doctor's words echoed in her mind: "Without this specialized treatment, your mother has months, not years." The treatment cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, money they'd never have. Tears slid down her cheeks as she stared at the impossible numbers on the page. When a nurse called her name, Zoe quickly wiped her face and straightened her shoulders. She couldn't let her mother see her despair. Diane had sacrificed everything to raise her alone. Now it was Zoe's turn to be strong. 2 different worlds existed in the same small city, Ethan's world of privilege and emptiness, and Zoe's world of struggle and purpose. Neither could imagine how soon their paths would cross, or how that crossing would change everything forever. Friday evening brought heavy rain to Riverside. Zoe finished her shift at the Mercer building, her shoulders aching from hours of scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins. Thunder rumbled outside as she changed out of her cleaner's uniform in the small employee locker room. She had exactly 45 minutes to catch the bus across town to the community college. Tonight's class was crucial, an advanced child development seminar that could lead to a paid internship. Her professor had hinted that representatives from a prestigious preschool might attend. Pulling on her thin jacket, Zoe hurried out into the downpour. By the time she reached the bus stop, she was already soaked. Cold water trickled down her neck as she dug through her purse for her bus pass. It wasn't there. Panic rose in her chest as she searched every pocket. The bus was due in 5 minutes. Without it, she'd missed the most important class of the semester. Desperate, she emptied her wallet onto the bench under the shelter, counting the loose change. $2.30, she whispered, her heart sinking. The fare was $3.50. The rain intensified, matching her growing despair. Everything depended on this class, on getting that internship. Without it, how would she ever move beyond minimum wage jobs? How would she pay for her mother's treatment? Tears mixed with raindrops on her cheeks as she stared hopelessly at the traffic light. That's when a sleek black Tesla pulled up to the red light beside the bus stop. Inside, Ethan Mercer was engaged in a heated phone conversation about design specifications for the new cultural center project. The council wants cost-cutting measures, but I won't compromise on the materials, he argued, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. As he waited for a response, his eyes drifted to the bus stop. A young woman stood there in the rain, clearly distressed. Something about her expression, determination mixed with desperation, caught his attention. He'd seen her before, he realized. At the building. One of the cleaning staff. Without thinking, Ethan lowered his window. "Excuse me," he called to his caller. "Something's come up. I'll call you back." He hung up and leaned toward the open window. "Are you okay?" he asked the woman. Zoe looked up, startled to see Ethan Mercer, the Ethan Mercer, talking to her. She'd glimpsed him many times in the hallways of Mercer Designs, but they'd never spoken. She hesitated, pride warring with necessity. "I lost my bus pass, and I don't have enough for the fare. I need to get to the community college for an important class." Ethan reached for his wallet without hesitation. "How much do you need?" $3.50, Zoe answered quietly, hating how her voice trembled. Ethan pulled out a $20 bill and held it out. "Here. It looks like it's going to rain all night. You might need extra for the trip back." Zoe stared at the money. In her world, strangers didn't just give you $20. Especially not rich, handsome strangers in luxury cars. "I'll pay you back," she promised, reluctantly taking the bill. "Don't worry about it," Ethan said with a small smile. Then the light turned green, and he had to go. "Good luck with your class," he called as he drove away. In his rearview mirror, he watched her run to the approaching bus, $20 bill clutched tightly in her hand. An unexpected feeling of satisfaction warmed his chest. When was the last time he'd done something spontaneously kind? As the Tesla disappeared around the corner, Zoe boarded the bus, paid her fare, and collapsed into a seat. She stared at the remaining money in her hand. $16.50, enough for dinner tonight and bus fare tomorrow. A small miracle from the most unexpected source. Neither of them could know that this brief encounter at a rainy bus stop would be the first thread in a tapestry that would eventually bind their lives together, revealing secrets that had been buried for decades. Have you ever met an angel in disguise on a difficult day? Tell us where you're watching from and if you've ever experienced an unexpected moment that changed your life. Share your city in the comments. The following Monday, Ethan arrived at his office to find a plain white envelope on his desk. Inside was a $20 bill and a handwritten note, "Thank you for your help. Didn't need the change. Zoe W." "Who left this?" he asked his assistant. "One of the cleaning staff dropped it off this morning," she replied without looking up from her computer. "I think she works the evening shift." Ethan stared at the note, surprised. He'd already forgotten about the money, but clearly, the woman at the bus stop hadn't. Something about her determination to repay a simple kindness intrigued him. Later that day, his Aunt Victoria summoned him to her office. At 60, Victoria Mercer remained an imposing figure with her perfectly styled silver hair and calculating eyes. As chair of the board, she maintained iron control over the company's direction. "The investors are concerned about your changes to the cultural center," she said without preamble. "You're making it too accessible." "That's the point," Ethan argued. "A cultural center should be for everyone, not just the wealthy." Victoria's lips thinned. "Save the idealism for charity work, Ethan. The Mercer brand means exclusivity. Your father understood that. Times are changing, Aunt Victoria. Not in our circle, they aren't." She tapped her manicured nails on her desk. "Remember who you are, Ethan. A Mercer doesn't mix with the common people. It's bad for business." That evening in his empty penthouse, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's words, and about the woman at the bus stop. Was that really the legacy his father wanted? A company that built beautiful spaces only for the wealthy? Meanwhile, Zoe returned home exhausted after her evening class to find her mother sitting in the dark, breathing heavily. "Mom." Zoe rushed to Diane's side, turning on a lamp. "Did you take your medication?" Diane nodded weakly. "Yes, but the doctor called today. The tests came back." Zoe sat beside her mother, dread settling in her stomach. "What did he say?" "The medication isn't working as well as they hoped. They want to try a new treatment protocol." Diane tried to smile reassuringly, but the effort fell flat. "It's more aggressive. Should be more effective." "That's good, right?" Zoe asked, already calculating costs in her head. "It's also more expensive," Diane admitted. "The insurance will only cover about 20%. Zoe fought to keep her expression neutral. "We'll figure it out. I can pick up more hours somewhere." Later that night, as Diane slept, Zoe pulled out their budget notebook. After adding the estimated costs of the new treatment, she closed the book quietly. There was no way to make the numbers work. She'd have to drop some classes to take on another job. The next morning, while cleaning offices at Mercer Designs, Zoe spotted Ethan walking through the lobby. Their eyes met briefly, and he seemed about to approach her. Quickly, she turned away, focusing intently on polishing the already gleaming reception desk. People like him and people like her didn't mix. The $20 had been an anomaly, a moment of kindness she'd repaid. Better to keep the boundaries clear. That evening, while helping her mother sort through old photos, Zoe noticed something strange. In several pictures, someone had been carefully cut out. "Who was this?" she asked, pointing to a photo of her mother as a young woman, standing with her arm around an empty space. Diane's face tightened. "No one important." "Was it my father?" Zoe pressed gently. Diane placed the photo back in the box. "The past is the past, Zoe. Some things are better left buried. I'm 20 years old, Mom. Don't you think I deserve to know something about him?" Diane sighed, suddenly looking much older than her 45 years. "He was handsome. Successful. From a wealthy family that would never have accepted someone like me." She paused. "Or you. Is that why he left?" "He made his choice," Diane said firmly. "We made ours. End of story." But Zoe could tell there was more, much more, her mother wasn't saying. The next day at Mercer Designs, while emptying trash bins, Zoe overheard Victoria Mercer on the phone in her office. "Of course we'll maintain exclusivity," Victoria was saying. "The Mercer name has meant excellence and exclusivity for 3 generations. Roger understood that above all else." Zoe continued her work, not really listening until she heard Victoria say, "The Washington proposal needs to be shut down immediately. We can't afford any connection to that name." Washington, her last name. Zoe froze, wondering if it was just coincidence. Surely Victoria Mercer couldn't be talking about her family. Why would anyone so powerful even know they existed? As Zoe hurried away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening, invisible threads connecting worlds that should never intersect. Washington, my office. Now. Marcus, the cleaning supervisor, barked at Zoe as she arrived for her shift. His permanent scowl seemed deeper than usual. In his cramped office that smelled of cigarettes and cheap cologne, Marcus leaned back in his chair. Someone upstairs requested you specifically for the executive floor. Zoe's heart skipped. The executive floor? Why? How should I know? Marcus sneered. But the pay's better. Don't screw it up. The next day, Zoe nervously pushed her cleaning cart out of the service elevator onto the 30th floor. The executive level of Mercer Designs was another world, plush carpets, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows with breathtaking views of the city. She was carefully dusting a sculpture when a voice behind her said, "Hello, Zoe." She turned to find Ethan Mercer watching her with a small smile. "Mr. Mercer," she said formally, though her heart raced. "Did you need something?" "I hope you don't mind the transfer," he said. "I noticed how thorough your work is." Zoe wanted to believe that was the only reason, but doubt crept in. "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied cautiously. "How was your class?" he asked. "The one you were rushing to that night?" Surprised he remembered, Zoe relaxed slightly. "It went well. The professor said I have a talent for working with children." Over the next few weeks, a strange routine developed. Zoe cleaned the executive floor in the evenings, and Ethan, who often worked late, would chat with her briefly. Their conversations were casual but surprisingly honest. He spoke about the pressure of living up to his father's legacy. She shared her dreams of opening a community daycare someday. One evening, Zoe mentioned needing time off for her mother's medical appointments. "What's wrong with her?" Ethan asked, genuine concern in his voice. "Advanced cardiomyopathy," Zoe explained. "She needs a specialized procedure our insurance barely covers. We're saving up, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to sound like she was asking for help. The next day, Ethan found himself driving to Riverside Memorial Hospital. He wasn't sure what compelled him to go there, concern for Zoe, curiosity, or something else he couldn't name. At the reception desk, he asked for Dr. Harrison, the cardiologist Zoe had mentioned. "Mr. Mercer," Dr. Harrison greeted him, clearly surprised to see the famous architect. "What brings you here?" "I'd like to discuss Diane Washington's case," Ethan said. "I'm a family friend." The doctor looked skeptical but professional. "I can't share specific details without consent, but generally speaking, Mrs. Washington needs specialized surgery within the next few months. Without it, her prognosis is poor." "What's the approximate cost for the best possible treatment?" Ethan asked. Dr. Harrison named a figure that made even Ethan blink, nearly $200,000. "I'd like to anonymously sponsor her treatment through the Mercer Foundation," Ethan said decisively. "Can you arrange that?" The doctor's eyebrows rose. "That's extremely generous. May I ask why?" "Let's just say I'm trying to do the right thing," Ethan replied vaguely. As he left the doctor's office, a woman in a nurse's uniform called out to him. "Mr. Mercer. A moment, please." She was in her mid-60s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. Her name tag read Eleanor Simmons, head nurse. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said. "You're helping Diane Washington." "I know her daughter," Ethan explained. "Zoe works at my company." Eleanor studied him with unexpected intensity. "Interesting. Diane was one of our best nursing assistants before her condition worsened. She and her daughter have been through a lot." Something in Eleanor's tone suggested deeper knowledge. "You seem to know them well," Ethan observed. "Diane and I worked together for 15 years, Eleanor nodded. "I know her story, all of it." A strange feeling crept up Ethan's spine. "What do you mean by that?" "Mr. Mercer, would you have time for coffee?" Eleanor asked. "There are things about the Washington family, and about your father, that I think you should know." Ethan stared at her, suddenly uneasy. "My father? What does he have to do with Diane Washington?" "Everything," Eleanor said simply. "But perhaps you're not ready to hear it yet." Ethan glanced at his watch, a convenient excuse. "I have a meeting. Perhaps another time." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised, and handed him her card. "When you're ready to learn the truth about the Washington family, and about your father, call me." Ethan pocketed the card, a chill running through him despite the hospital's warmth. What truth was this woman hiding? And why had she mentioned his father? That evening, as Zoe cleaned his office, Ethan watched her with new eyes, wondering what connection could possibly exist between her family and his. There was something familiar about her profile, the determined set of her jaw. But he dismissed the thought as imagination. "My mother's doctor called today," Zoe said, breaking the silence. "Apparently the Mercer Foundation has a special medical assistance program. They're going to cover her treatment completely." She looked at him suspiciously. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Ethan maintained a neutral expression. "The foundation has many programs I'm not directly involved with. But that's wonderful news." Zoe didn't seem entirely convinced, but gratitude won over suspicion. "It's a miracle." Mom was in tears when she heard. As Zoe left that evening, Ethan pulled Eleanor's card from his pocket, staring at the phone number. Whatever truth she held, he wasn't sure he was ready to face it. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Ethan sat in his office late into the night, staring at the foundation paperwork he'd just completed. Getting the board to approve Diane Washington's treatment as a pilot healthcare assistance program had required creative wording and half-truths. He'd never bent rules like this before, always following the straight corporate path his father had laid out. "What am I doing?" he whispered to the empty room. Despite his doubts, the next morning he submitted the paperwork with his executive authorization. By afternoon, it was processed. The Mercer Foundation would anonymously cover all expenses for Diane Washington's treatment, nearly $200,000 worth of specialized cardiac care. Ethan told himself it was simple charity, the right thing to do. But Eleanor Simmons' card burned in his wallet, a reminder that something deeper might be at play. Across town, Zoe and Diane sat stunned in Dr. Harrison's office as he explained the anonymous donation that would Washington and her mother, Diane. Immediately. That night, Ethan received a text from Eleanor Simmons, "When you're ready to learn the truth, I'm here. Some secrets shouldn't remain buried forever." He stared at his phone for a long time before responding, "What does this have to do with Zoe?" Eleanor's reply came quickly, "Everything." Ethan looked out his penthouse window toward the west side of town where Zoe and her mother lived. He'd crossed a line helping them, using company resources, lying to the board. There was no going back now. Whatever truth Eleanor held, he sensed it would change everything. "Looking good, Mrs. Washington," Dr. Harrison said as he reviewed Diane's latest test results. "The treatment is working better than expected." Diane smiled weakly from the hospital bed. "When can I go home?" "Another few days of observation, then we'll continue with outpatient treatment." Zoe squeezed her mother's hand. The specialized treatment was working miracles. Just a month ago, they'd been preparing for the worst. Now, there was hope. "I don't know how we got so lucky," Diane murmured after the doctor left. Zoe thought of Ethan but said nothing. Her mother still tensed whenever the Mercer name was mentioned, and Zoe wasn't ready to explain their growing friendship. Back at Mercer Designs, the whispers followed Zoe everywhere. Female employees gave her cold looks in the break room. Male employees watched her with new interest. Marcus had done his work well, spreading rumors about her special arrangement with the boss. "Washington." Marcus barked one afternoon. "My office, now. He slid a paper across his desk. We're cutting back on cleaning staff. Your services are no longer required on the executive floor. What? Why? Zoe asked, stunned. Marcus smirked. Budget cuts. Don't worry, you can keep your other shifts. Unless you want to complain to your friend upstairs. Zoe's cheeks burned, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her upset. That won't be necessary. That evening, Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from Jason, we need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park at 7, her heart sank. After their argument at dinner, things had been tense. She'd hoped to work things out, but his tone seemed ominous. At the park, Jason paced nervously, not meeting her eyes. What's going on? Zoe asked. I got some messages, he said, showing her his phone. Anonymous texts. About you and Mercer. The texts contained vicious lies, suggesting Zoe was sleeping with Ethan for favors and money. One even included a doctored photo of them standing too close together, clearly manipulated but convincing enough. You can't believe this, Zoe whispered. I don't want to, Jason said. But your mom's treatment, your special job on the executive floor, the way you defend him. So you think I'm selling myself? Zoe's voice cracked. After 3 years together, that's what you think of me? I don't know what to think anymore. Jason exploded. You're different lately. Distant. Secretive. I've been helping my dying mother. Zoe shot back. And working 3 jobs while going to school. Look, I'm not rich like Mercer. I can't give you what he can. Maybe it's better if we just don't, Zoe cut him off. Don't you dare break up with me because of lies and jealousy. But it was too late. Jason's expression hardened. It's over, Zoe. I hope he was worth it. He walked away, leaving Zoe standing alone as other park visitors stared. Humiliation washed over her. How many people had heard the rumors? How many believed them? The next day at community college, Zoe tried to focus on her childhood development class, but Jason's accusations kept replaying in her mind. After class, Professor Ramirez asked her to stay behind. Your work has been exceptional, Zoe, the older woman said. Especially your project on early intervention techniques for at-risk children. Thank you, Zoe replied, trying to sound normal despite her emotional turmoil. I noticed something special in how you handled Tommy during his meltdown last week, Professor Ramirez continued. Many experienced teachers wouldn't have responded so intuitively. My mom always said listening is more important than talking when trying to understand someone, Zoe explained. Professor Ramirez smiled. Wise woman, your mother. Have you considered applying for the Marshall Scholarship for Educators? Zoe shook her head. That's for people with connections and perfect GPAs. It's for exceptional future teachers, Professor Ramirez corrected. Which you are. I know people on the committee. With your talent and life story, you're exactly what they're looking for. For the first time in days, Zoe felt a spark of hope. You really think I could qualify? I know you could. Let me help with the application. Later that day, Zoe returned to Mercer Designs for her remaining cleaning shift. She avoided the executive floor, still stinging from Marcus's demotion. As she emptied trash bins on the 20th floor, she heard her name mentioned in a nearby conference room. This thing with Zoe Washington, a woman was saying. Victoria is furious. Can you blame her? Another voice replied. If the rumors are true, it's completely inappropriate. He's the CEO, she's a janitor. Cleaner, not janitor, the first voice corrected. And who cares if it's true? He's single, she's single. Victoria cares. She's having the girl investigated. Apparently, there's some history with the Washington family. Zoe backed away, her heart pounding. Victoria Mercer was investigating her. Why would someone so powerful care about a cleaning staff member? That evening, Zoe found herself crying alone in the employee locker room after her shift. The events of the week had finally overwhelmed her: Jason's public breakup, the workplace rumors, Marcus's demotion, and now Victoria's mysterious investigation. She didn't hear the door open until Ethan's voice spoke softly. "Zoe? Are you okay?" Embarrassed, she quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine. Just allergies." Ethan sat on the bench beside her, not speaking. He simply offered a clean handkerchief and his silent presence. The simple human kindness broke through her defenses, and tears flowed freely. Ethan didn't try to hug her or offer empty platitudes. He just sat there, a steady presence in her storm of emotions. This moment of compassionate silence touched your heart. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a simple gesture that said more than 1,000 words? Subscribe now to never miss a moment of this emotional journey and share your experience in the comments. Victoria Mercer sat alone in the boardroom, a thick folder open before her. The private investigator had been thorough: medical records, financial statements, old emails, and even Diane Washington's employment history. What she found confirmed her worst fears. When Ethan entered, she didn't look up. "Close the door." He complied, eyeing the scattered papers. "What's all this?" "Explain yourself," Victoria demanded, finally meeting his gaze. "Why are you so interested in this cleaning girl and her mother?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan replied, though his racing heart betrayed him. "Don't play dumb with me." Victoria's voice was ice. "The expensive treatment, the special position, your late-night conversations. What does Zoe Washington mean to you? She's a hard-working employee going through a difficult time. I'm helping her." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Helping her? Do you even know who she is?" "A young woman trying to better herself while caring for her sick mother," Ethan said, his irritation growing. Victoria pushed a folder toward him. "Read it. Especially her birth certificate." Reluctantly, Ethan opened the folder. His eyes scanned the documents until they landed on Zoe's birth certificate. Under "Father," a name jumped out at him. Roger Ethan Mercer. This can't be right," he stammered, feeling the room tilt. "Oh, but it is." Victoria produced another document, a DNA test report. "Your precious father secretly ordered this test when he learned of the pregnancy. 99.9% probability. Zoe Washington is your half-sister, Ethan. The bastard daughter of Roger and that nurse he had an affair with while engaged to your mother." Ethan collapsed into a chair, his mind racing. Why didn't I know about this?" "Because we handled it," Victoria said coldly. "We paid the girl to disappear, to move away. Apparently, she didn't go far enough." "Paid her? You mean Diane? You offered her money too?" Ethan couldn't finish the thought. "First to terminate the pregnancy," Victoria stated without emotion. "When she refused, we increased the offer for her to at least have the good sense to leave town. The scandal would have destroyed Roger's engagement and tarnished the company's reputation permanently." Nausea swept through Ethan. "Are you telling me my father abandoned his own child? That you paid to hide her existence? Don't be dramatic. We did what was necessary to protect the family and the company." Roger eventually understood that, even if he went through a difficult period. Ethan stared at the birth certificate, at his father's name. All these years, he'd had a sister. A sister who cleaned floors in the building that should partly be hers by birthright. "What will you do now?" Victoria asked, watching him carefully. "I need time to think," Ethan managed, gathering the documents. Victoria nodded. "Take the day. But remember, Ethan, there are specific provisions in Roger's will and legal agreements that prevented Diane from seeking recognition or money. If you try to change that, you risk your own position and the future of the company." After Victoria left, Ethan spent hours examining the documents. Old photos of his father with Diane showed them looking happy, in love. Love letters revealed a deeper relationship than a casual affair. Finally, he found the confidentiality agreement Diane had signed, promising never to reveal Zoe's paternity in exchange for a substantial sum, money that, according to bank records, she had never touched. That evening, Ethan drove to Riverside Memorial Hospital, determined to speak with Eleanor Simmons. The nurse greeted him with knowing eyes. "So now you know," she said, leading him to the empty hospital cafeteria. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" Ethan demanded. Eleanor sighed. "It wasn't my place to drop that bomb. I needed you to form a connection with Zoe first, to see her as a person, not just a problem to solve. Tell me everything. How did it happen? How could my father just abandon them?" Eleanor's eyes grew distant. "Roger was treated here after a minor car accident. Diane was his nurse. They fell in love quickly, real love, not just some tawdry affair. When she got pregnant, he initially wanted to do the right thing. So what changed? Your grandfather and Victoria happened," Eleanor explained. "They threatened to disinherit him, to ruin Diane's career. They convinced him the scandal would destroy everything he'd built. Victoria was particularly vicious. She told Diane that no hospital in the region would hire her if she insisted on keeping the baby or revealing who the father was. And my father just went along with it." Ethan couldn't reconcile this with the man he'd idolized. Not at first. He visited Diane secretly during her pregnancy. But eventually, the pressure from family, fear of scandal, millions at stake with his arranged marriage, he chose what seemed like the easier path. "He was a coward," Ethan whispered. "He was human," Eleanor corrected gently. "A flawed man who made a terrible choice he regretted for the rest of his life." Regretted? He never tried to make it right. Eleanor hesitated. "There's more to the story, Ethan. Things even Victoria doesn't know. Tell me." "Your father kept tabs on Zoe throughout her life. Anonymous gifts for her education, pulling strings to ensure Diane always had work. He never stopped caring, even if he lacked the courage to acknowledge her publicly." Ethan processed this information slowly. "Does Zoe know any of this?" "No. Diane protected her from the truth. She didn't want Zoe to feel unwanted or to resent her heritage." "I have to tell her," Ethan said firmly. Eleanor placed a weathered hand on his. "Be careful, Ethan. This truth could either heal old wounds or create new ones. The question is, what kind of brother do you want to be? The kind who repeats your father's mistakes, or the kind who makes them right?" Ethan looked at the hospital ceiling, feeling the weight of a 20-year-old secret settling on his shoulders. "What would you do?" "I'd remember that the truth, however painful, is the only foundation you can build anything lasting upon," Eleanor answered. "But how and when you reveal it matters almost as much as the truth itself." Zoe stared at the letter in disbelief. "Academic scholarship under review due to irregularities in the approval process. Just yesterday, Professor Ramirez had helped her submit her application for the Marshall Scholarship. Now, her existing financial aid was in jeopardy. Her phone buzzed with a text from the manager at her second cleaning job, "No need to come in today. Position eliminated due to budget cuts. 2 jobs lost in 1 week." This couldn't be coincidence. Meanwhile, Diane was having her scheduled treatment at the hospital when a billing administrator approached her. "Mrs. Washington, there's an issue with your funding. The Mercer Foundation is questioning some irregularities with your approval. Treatment might be suspended until it's resolved." Diane paled. "But I'm in the middle of the protocol. The doctor said interrupting it could be dangerous." "I'm sorry," the administrator said, not meeting her eyes. "It's out of my hands." Across town, Ethan was reviewing architectural plans when his assistant buzzed him. "Victoria wants to see you immediately." His aunt was waiting with a cold smile. I see you're still processing our discussion from yesterday. You could say that, Ethan replied carefully. I thought you might need motivation to make the right decision. Victoria opened her laptop. I've taken steps to protect the company's interests. What does that mean? It means your little charity case has lost her position on the cleaning staff due to budget cuts. Her scholarship is under review. And there's an issue with the foundation funding for her mother's treatment. Ethan froze. You did what? Nothing permanent, Victoria said smoothly. Yet. Consider it a demonstration of what's at stake. You're threatening a sick woman's life to control me. Ethan's voice shook with rage. I'm protecting our family legacy. If you insist on acknowledging this girl as a Mercer, I'll have no choice but to take more serious measures. What exactly are you threatening, Victoria? She slid a document across the desk. The board can vote to remove you as CEO if they believe you're acting against the company's interests. And they will, if I present evidence that you've been misusing foundation funds for personal reasons. That's extortion. That's business. Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. Make the right choice, Ethan. For everyone's sake. Ethan stormed out, nearly colliding with his assistant. Cancel my meetings. And get me Eleanor Simmons on the phone. An hour later, Ethan found Zoe at a small cafe where she'd started working after being fired from her cleaning jobs. Her eyes widened with surprise when he walked in. What are you doing here? She asked, glancing nervously at her manager. We need to talk. It's urgent. Outside, Zoe's expression hardened. Let me guess, you're here to tell me I've lost this job too. What? No. Zoe, I had nothing to do with what's happening. Really? Because I've lost 2 jobs, my scholarship's in danger, and now Mom's treatment is suddenly under review. All after we became, whatever we are. Ethan ran his hand through his hair. It's Victoria. She's behind all this. Your aunt. Why would she care about me? It's complicated, Ethan said, not ready to reveal the full truth yet. But I'm going to fix it, I promise. Zoe laughed bitterly. Fix it? My mom could die if her treatment stops. My entire future is falling apart. Don't make promises you can't keep. Trust me, please. I'm working on a solution. Why should I trust you? Zoe demanded. From the moment we met, you've been hiding things. Why help us at all? What do you really want from me? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Before Ethan could answer, Zoe's phone rang. It was the hospital. Mom. Her face drained of color as she listened. I'll be right there. Hanging up, she turned panicked eyes to Ethan. They've stopped her treatment. She's having complications. My car's right here. I'll drive you. At the hospital, they found Diane in distress, her heart monitor beeping erratically as doctors worked to stabilize her. Dr. Harrison approached them in the hallway. What happened? Zoe demanded. The interruption in her protocol triggered an arrhythmia, he explained grimly. We're doing everything we can, but it's serious. This is your fault, Zoe hissed at Ethan. You and your family. I'm going to fix this, Ethan repeated, pulling out his phone. He made a series of rapid calls, first to the foundation's director, then to the hospital administrator, finally to his personal attorney. The treatment is back on, he told Zoe 30 minutes later. I've guaranteed payment personally if the foundation backs out. Zoe's shoulders sagged with momentary relief before tension returned. Thank you. But this doesn't explain why your aunt is trying to destroy my life. Ethan took a deep breath. Zoe, there's something I need to tell you. Something about your father. Before he could continue, Eleanor appeared down the hallway, her face grave as she approached them. Diane is stable for now, she informed them, but she's asking for you, Zoe. We'll finish this conversation later, Zoe said to Ethan, following Eleanor. Left alone, Ethan called Eleanor's phone so they could speak privately. Victoria's gone too far, he said when she answered. She's using Diane's life as leverage. Then you need leverage of your own, Eleanor replied. Something Victoria doesn't know about. Like what? Meet me in the hospital archives in 20 minutes. There's something you need to see. Ethan found Eleanor in the basement archives, surrounded by dusty boxes. Your father kept records, she explained, handing him a faded envelope. Letters, photos, and most importantly, an amendment to his will that Victoria doesn't know exists. Inside was a handwritten document dated just weeks before Roger Mercer's death. It established a substantial trust fund for my daughter, Zoe Washington, to be revealed on her 21st birthday or in the event of Diane's death, whichever came first. Why hasn't this been executed? Ethan asked. It was never filed with the main will, Eleanor explained. Roger gave it to me for safekeeping, but he died before he could make it official. Legally, it's questionable, but morally. It proves his intentions, Ethan finished. It might be enough to pressure Victoria. As he left the archives, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Your future with the company will be decided. Choose wisely. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Diane lay sleeping, her face pale but peaceful now that her condition had stabilized. Zoe sat beside her, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. She'll be okay, Eleanor assured her, checking the 4. The doctors got to her in time. This time, Zoe said bitterly. But what happens when Victoria Mercer decides to interfere again? I don't understand why she's doing this to us. Eleanor sat in the chair opposite Zoe. There's a history between your mother and the Mercer family that goes back many years. Zoe looked up sharply. What history? It's not my place to tell the full story, Eleanor said carefully. But I think it's time you asked your mother about your father. She never talks about him. Maybe it's time she did. Meanwhile, Ethan had returned to the Mercer Designs building. The offices were empty at this late hour, giving him freedom to search without interruption. He made his way to the company's secure storage room, where decades of records were kept. Using his executive access code, he entered the climate-controlled room. Hundreds of boxes lined the shelves, organized by year. He headed straight for the section marked 1995 to 2000, the years when his father would have met Diane. After hours of searching, Ethan found what he was looking for, a box labeled, R. Mercer, Personal. Inside were documents his father had kept separate from company records, old sketches, journals, and a small leather-bound diary. Ethan opened the diary with trembling hands. The first entry was dated shortly after Roger met Diane, met someone today. Different from anyone I've ever known. D. sees the world with such clarity and compassion. When she speaks, I actually listen. Later entries chronicled their relationship, Roger's joy at learning about the pregnancy, and then his anguish at the choice before him, Victoria and father are relentless. Threatening Dee's career, my inheritance, everything we've built. Catherine's family would withdraw all funding from the company if I break the engagement. Thousands of jobs at stake. What right do I have to risk so many livelihoods for personal happiness? The final entries revealed a broken man, tortured by his decision, saw Dee and the baby from afar today. She's beautiful. Has my mother's eyes. I've arranged for funds to be sent anonymously for her education. It's a pitiful substitute for being a father, but it's all I can do now. Ethan closed the diary, emotions churning. His father had been both weaker and more complex than he'd ever imagined. The great Roger Mercer, paralyzed by family expectation and business pressure, had abandoned his own child while secretly trying to ease his conscience. Back at the hospital, Diane had awakened to find Zoe still at her bedside. "You should go home, get some rest," Diane said weakly. "I'm not leaving you," Zoe insisted. "And we need to talk." "About what?" "My father. The Mercers. Why Victoria seems determined to hurt us." Diane's face paled even further. "Who told you?" "No one had to tell me. It's obvious something's going on. I deserve to know the truth, Mom." Diane closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "You're right. You've always deserved the truth." She reached for Zoe's hand. "Your father was Roger Mercer." The words hung in the air between them. Despite suspecting a connection, hearing it confirmed knocked the breath from Zoe's lungs. "The Roger Mercer? Ethan's father?" Diane nodded. "We met when he was brought to the hospital after a car accident. I was his nurse. He was engaged to Ethan's mother, but..." She shrugged. "We fell in love. When I got pregnant, he initially wanted to leave his fiancée, acknowledge you, build a life together. What changed? His family intervened. Victoria led the charge. They threatened my career, offered money to..." Diane's voice faltered. "To end the pregnancy. When I refused, they increased the offer for me to leave town, stay quiet about who your father was. And you took it?" Zoe asked, stunned. "I took the agreement, but not their money," Diane said fiercely. "Not a penny. I couldn't bear to profit from denying you your heritage. I just wanted to protect you from their world." Across town, Ethan continued his search through company archives. In a file labeled Legal Settlements, he found the original confidentiality agreement Diane had signed, along with bank records confirming the money had never been touched. More shocking was a second document he discovered, notes from the family attorney indicating that Roger had consulted him about changing his will just weeks before his sudden death. He'd wanted to acknowledge Zoe legally and provide for her future. He tried to make it right, Ethan whispered to the empty room. Too late, but he tried. Meanwhile, Victoria was in her home office, preparing for the next day's board meeting. Her phone rang. It was Marcus, the cleaning supervisor. "They're on to us," he said without preamble. "Someone's been asking about those anonymous texts I sent to Washington's boyfriend." "Deal with it," Victoria snapped. "I need this situation contained before tomorrow's meeting." As she hung up, an email notification appeared on her screen. The subject line read simply, "Roger and Diane, the truth." The sender was anonymous, but the attached photo showed Roger Mercer with his arm around a young Diane, both smiling radiantly. Victoria's hand trembled as she deleted the email. Someone was digging into the past, threatening everything she'd worked to protect. She couldn't let that happen, no matter what it took. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees at Riverside Park as Ethan paced nervously. This was where Diane used to bring Zoe as a child, a detail from Roger's diary that proved he had watched his daughter from afar for years. When Zoe finally arrived, her face was drawn from a sleepless night. "You wanted to talk. So talk. How's your mother?" Ethan asked. "Stable. The doctors say she can come home in a few days." Zoe crossed her arms. "But you didn't ask me here to discuss her health." "No." Ethan took a deep breath. "I know you spoke with your mother last night. About your father." Zoe's eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" "Because I've been piecing together the same story from the other side." Ethan gestured to a bench. "Please, sit. What I have to tell you will be difficult to hear." As they sat, Ethan pulled out Roger's diary and the documents he'd found. "I discovered these in the company archives last night. My father's personal journals, records of the agreement with your mother, evidence that he tried to change his will before he died." Why were you looking into my father? Zoe asked, suspicion edging her voice. Ethan met her gaze directly. Because Roger Mercer was my father too, Zoe. We're half-siblings. The words hung in the air between them. Though Diane had revealed Roger was her father, connecting that to Ethan hadn't fully registered until this moment. You knew, she whispered, realization dawning. All this time, you knew we were related, and you didn't tell me. No, Ethan said quickly. I only discovered it recently. Victoria found out first and confronted me. That's why she's been trying to sabotage you. She's protecting the family secret. So when you helped me, when you paid for Mom's treatment, it wasn't kindness. It was guilt. Obligation. Zoe stood, anger flashing in her eyes. Was this some kind of sick game? Getting to know your secret sister without telling her who you are? It wasn't like that, Ethan protested. I helped you before I knew the truth. I kept helping you after because it was the right thing to do. The right thing would have been honesty. Zoe shouted. Do you have any idea what it feels like to learn your entire life has been built on lies? That you have wealthy family who rejected you? I never rejected you, Ethan said softly. I didn't know you existed. But your father did. Your aunt did. They decided I wasn't worthy of the precious Mercer name. Tears filled Zoe's eyes. And you kept the truth from me too, even after you found out. I was trying to find the right way to tell you. There is no right way to tell someone they've been erased. Zoe turned to leave. Zoe, wait, Ethan called. Victoria has called a board meeting for this morning. She's trying to have me removed as CEO because I helped you. She's going to cut off your mother's treatment permanently if I don't agree to her terms. Zoe froze. What terms? That I stop helping you. That we both sign new confidentiality agreements promising never to acknowledge our relationship. Ethan approached cautiously. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to fight her. But I need your help. Before Zoe could respond, her phone rang. It was the hospital. It's Mom, she said, face paling as she listened. She's had another episode. They're saying it's critical. They raced to the hospital, animosity temporarily set aside in shared concern for Diane. They found her in the ICU, doctors working frantically around her. What happened? Zoe demanded of a nurse. Her heart rhythm became erratic again. We're doing everything we can. Hours passed in tense silence as they waited for news. Finally, Dr. Harrison approached. We've stabilized her, but she's very weak, he explained. The interruption in her treatment protocol caused significant stress on her heart. Will she recover? Zoe asked, voice breaking. If we can resume the full treatment immediately, yes. But we need authorization from the foundation. They've placed a hold on funding pending review. I'll handle it, Ethan promised, stepping away to make calls. When he returned, his expression was grim. Victoria has frozen all foundation assets pending the board meeting. No authorizations can be processed. So my mother might die because of your family's politics? Zoe's voice was ice. Not if I can help it. Ethan pulled out his phone again. I'm calling an emergency board meeting right now. This ends today. While waiting for Diane to regain consciousness, Victoria herself appeared in the hospital corridor, elegant as always in her designer suit. I heard about the unfortunate setback, she said with practiced concern. Such a shame. Cut the act, Ethan snapped. We know what you're doing. Victoria's eyes hardened. I'm protecting our family legacy. Something you seem determined to destroy. You're using a woman's life as leverage, Zoe interjected. What kind of person does that? Victoria turned cold eyes to Zoe. A practical one. However, I'm not unreasonable. She removed documents from her briefcase. Sign these papers renouncing any claim to the Mercer name or fortune, and your mother's treatment will resume immediately. Fully funded. You're blackmailing me with my mother's life, Zoe said in disbelief. I'm offering a solution that works for everyone, Victoria countered. The Mercer name stays untarnished, your mother gets the care she needs, and you can continue your little scholarship with our blessing. Before either could respond, a weak voice called from the doorway of Diane's room. She had woken and wheeled herself to the door in her four-stand. It's always about image with you, isn't it, Victoria? Victoria turned, shock briefly crossing her face. Diane. You should be resting. And you should be ashamed, Diane replied, her voice gaining strength. 20 years later, and you're still trying to erase my daughter. Mom, please, you need to rest, Zoe urged. Diane shook her head. No more secrets. She fixed her gaze on Victoria. You should know something. Roger came back to me, years after Zoe was born. He wanted to acknowledge her, to be part of her life. That's a lie, Victoria hissed. I have the letters to prove it, Diane continued. I turned him away. Not for your money, but because I'd seen what your family's toxicity did to him. I didn't want that for my daughter. Diane's revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap, changing everything. They thought they knew about the past. The revelation that Diane had rejected Roger's later attempts to acknowledge Zoe stunned everyone in the hospital corridor. Victoria recovered first, her composure sliding back into place like a mask. A convenient story, she said dismissively. But without proof I have proof, Diane interrupted, leaning heavily on her four-stand. Eleanor has kept Roger's letters all these years. I gave them to her for safekeeping, in case this day ever came. Victoria's face hardened. This changes nothing. The board meeting is in 2 hours. My recommendation stands. She turned to leave, then paused. Think carefully about those papers, Zoe. Your mother's treatment depends on your signature. After Victoria left, nurses rushed to return Diane to bed. Once she was settled, Zoe and Ethan stood on opposite sides of her bed, united in concern despite their conflict. Why didn't you tell me? Zoe asked her mother. I wanted to protect you, Diane replied weakly. From their world, their values. But he wanted to acknowledge me. To be my father. By then, I didn't trust him, Diane explained. He'd already chosen his family and company over us once. I couldn't risk him hurting you again. Ethan studied Diane's face. You loved him, didn't you? Even after everything. Part of me did, Diane admitted. But love isn't always enough. A nurse entered to check Diane's vitals. She needs rest, she advised. You should continue this conversation elsewhere. In the hallway, Zoe and Ethan faced each other awkwardly. What do we do now? Zoe asked. We fight, Ethan said simply. Together. Why would you risk everything for me? Your position, your company. Because you're my sister, Ethan replied. And because it's the right thing to do. Something my father failed to understand until it was too late. Eleanor arrived, holding a large envelope. Diane called me. These are Roger's letters, plus the amendment to his will I showed you, Ethan. They reviewed the documents together. Roger's letters to Diane revealed a man tortured by regret, begging for a chance to know his daughter. The amendment to his will established a substantial trust fund for Zoe. This changes everything, Ethan said. With these documents and my father's diary, we can challenge Victoria at the board meeting. I'm coming with you, Zoe decided. Are you sure? Ethan asked. It could get ugly. I've spent my life cleaning up other people's messes, Zoe said with determination. It's time I faced this one head-on. While Zoe stayed with her mother a few more minutes, Ethan made a crucial call to an old family friend and board member, William Foster. Will, I need your support today, Ethan explained the situation. "This is unexpected," William replied. "But I always suspected something happened between your father and that nurse. The timing of his engagement to your mother seemed rushed. Will you help us?" A pause. "Your father was my best friend, Ethan. I'll hear you out." 2 hours later, Ethan and Zoe entered the Mercer Designs boardroom. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members and the company's legal counsel. Her confident smile faltered when she saw Zoe. "This is a private board meeting," she objected. "Ms. Washington has no place here." "As my father's daughter, she has every right to be here," Ethan countered, placing Roger's diary in the stack of letters on the table. "Everyone in this room should hear the full story before voting." Victoria's lawyer interjected, "The confidentiality agreement signed by Diane Washington explicitly prevents any claim of paternity." "An agreement violated by the Mercer family itself," Ethan replied. "The funding promised in exchange was never delivered because Diane never accepted it. And an agreement signed under duress, with threats to her career, might not hold up in court anyway." Murmurs circulated among the board members. "Furthermore," Ethan continued, "I have documentation that my father attempted to amend his will shortly before his death, establishing a trust fund for Zoe." Victoria laughed dismissively. "A handwritten note that was never filed with his official will? Legally worthless." "Perhaps," agreed Ethan. "But morally telling." He turned to the board. "My father made a terrible mistake. He chose the company and family expectations over doing the right thing. It haunted him for the rest of his life." He opened Roger's diary to a marked page and read, "I've built an empire of glass and steel, but lost my soul in the process. My greatest regret is not acknowledging my daughter. Money and status mean nothing compared to the love I've forsaken." The room fell silent. Several older board members, who had known Roger personally, shifted uncomfortably. "This is all very touching," Victoria said coldly, "but it doesn't change company policy or the reputational risk of acknowledging an illegitimate heir after all these years." "Actually, it might," interrupted William Foster, the senior board member. "I've known Roger since college. This diary reads exactly like him. If he wanted to acknowledge his daughter, on what grounds are we continuing to deny her existence?" Victoria's face flushed with anger. "On the grounds that the Mercer name stands for excellence, for legacy. Not scandal and illegitimacy. The only scandal here," Zoe spoke for the first time, her voice steady, "is how far you've gone to hide the truth. Sabotaging my education, my employment, even my mother's medical treatment. That's the real stain on the Mercer name." William Foster looked shocked. "Is this true, Victoria? Did you interfere with medical treatment?" Victoria's composure slipped. "I did what was necessary to protect to protect what?" Ethan interrupted. "Your position. Your control. Because it certainly wasn't to protect this family or its values." As Victoria struggled to respond, Ethan played his final card. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Victoria Mercer's board leadership, based on her ethical breaches and actions harmful to both the company and the Mercer family legacy." William Foster nodded grimly. "Seconded. All in favor?" One by one, hands rose around the table. Victoria watched in disbelief as her power slipped away. "You can't do this," she whispered. "It's already done," Ethan replied. "The board has spoken." 1 year had passed since the dramatic board meeting that changed everything. The morning sun shone brightly on the freshly painted sign, Diane Washington Educational Center, located in the heart of Riverside's West Side neighborhood. A crowd had gathered for the grand opening. Children played on the colorful playground while parents chatted excitedly about the center's programs. At the entrance, Zoe stood in a simple blue dress, greeting families with the warm smile that had always been her strength. Nearby, Diane looked radiant in a floral dress, her health fully restored thanks to the completed treatment. She was deep in conversation with Eleanor, who had retired from nursing to become the center's health consultant. Ethan arrived in a modest sedan rather than his usual Tesla, having embraced a less ostentatious lifestyle over the past year. The Mercer Designs logo had been redesigned, still elegant, but more approachable, much like the company's new direction. "Nervous?" he asked, joining Zoe at the entrance. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly excited. I still can't believe we pulled this off." The educational center had been Zoe's dream, brought to life through the restructured Mercer Foundation. Located in an underserved area, it offered quality childcare and early education to families of all income levels, with scholarships for those who needed them. "You did most of the work," Ethan reminded her. "I just provided the building. And the funding, and the connections, and convinced the board this was good for the company's image," Zoe teased. Their relationship had evolved over the months, awkward at first, then cautiously friendly, and finally settling into a genuine sibling bond. The ceremony began with Diane cutting the ribbon. Tearfully, she addressed the crowd, "This center represents everything I've always believed in, that every child deserves opportunity, regardless of where they come from. I'm so proud to see my daughter's vision become reality." After the applause died down, Ethan stepped forward. The Washington Educational Center isn't just about giving back to the community. It's about recognizing that true legacy isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts, but in the lives we touch and the values we uphold. As families toured the facility, Ethan led Zoe to a private office. "There's something I want to show you," he said, unrolling a set of architectural plans. "I found these in storage last week. Dad's last design project, one he never submitted to the board." Zoe examined the drawings in surprise. "This looks like a community center," Ethan finished. "Almost identical to what we've just built, but designed 20 years ago." He even noted it should be located in Westside. "He wanted to build something for my neighborhood?" Zoe asked, tracing the careful lines with her fingertip. "I think he wanted to build something for you," Ethan replied gently. "Something he couldn't give you directly." Zoe blinked back tears. The man who had fathered and abandoned her had remained a complicated figure in her mind. Neither saint nor complete villain, just a flawed person who had made painful choices. "What do you think about completing his vision?" Ethan suggested. "We could make it phase 2, add adult education classes, job training, the medical clinic Mom keeps talking about." "I'd like that," Zoe smiled. "It would be a way to honor the best of him, while acknowledging our own path forward." Victoria had left for Europe shortly after the board vote, maintaining her financial stake in the company but relinquishing all operational control. The confidentiality agreements had been voided, and Zoe had been legally recognized as Roger Mercer's daughter, receiving her rightful inheritance. The Marshall Scholarship had been restored and expanded, allowing Zoe to complete her education while developing the center's curriculum. Eleanor had become a trusted advisor to both siblings, helping them navigate their new relationship. As they returned to the main hall, they found Diane standing before a newly unveiled photograph on the wall, the picture of her and Roger that had once had his face cut out, now restored and framed. "You put it up," she said quietly to Zoe. "It's part of our history," Zoe replied. "The good and the bad. I'm not ashamed of where I come from anymore." Diane hugged her daughter tightly. "Your father would be so proud of who you've become. Both of you," she added, including Ethan in her gaze. Later, as the celebration continued, Zoe gathered a group of children for story time in the reading corner. Ethan watched from the doorway as his sister captivated her young audience. "Once upon a time," Zoe began, "there was a king who had a great treasure, but because of fear and pride, he hid it away where no one could find it. Years later, his children discovered this treasure and instead of keeping it for themselves, they shared it with the entire kingdom." A little girl raised her hand. "Wouldn't the king be sad that they gave away his treasure?" Zoe smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes our greatest regret isn't what we lose, but what we could have shared." The true treasure only grows when it's given away. As the children pondered this, Ethan slipped away, a peaceful smile on his face. Through pain and truth, they had found something neither wealth nor status could provide: family, purpose, and the chance to build something meaningful together. Outside, he paused to look at the center's sign once more. The Washington name stood proud, no longer hidden or erased. And beside it, in smaller letters, a Mercer Foundation initiative, 2 families finally acknowledged as one. This journey of redemption and truth touched your heart. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the end. Which moment moved you the most? Was it the family reunion, the fight for justice, or the final forgiveness? Leave your like, share with someone who needs to hear about second chances, and tell us in the comments what message you take from this story.